Childhood trauma is extremely overrated. Here's why. Childhood trauma has become a popular buzzword in recent years. You hear it in therapy discussions, read about it in self-help books, and see it in the feed of every life coach on TikTok.
Childhood trauma?
A childhood trauma.
A childhood trauma.
It feels like it's become the go-to explanation for just about anything and everything that we struggle with as adults. Got anxiety? Your mother probably didn't show you enough love. Trouble with relationships? Maybe your dad didn't go to your soccer games growing up. Even feeling unmotivated at work somehow gets traced back to being picked last for dodgeball that one time in 3rd grade. It's true that childhood trauma can shape us, and very deeply. But has it become too easy, even comforting, to play the trauma card every time life throws us a new challenge? Is it causing us to ignore the real reasons that drive our actions and behavior? In this video, we'll explore why our obsession with childhood trauma might be holding us back, and how science actually views trauma's impact on our brains. Because you might just have more control over your life than you think. I'm Max. I break down the science of emotions, the mind, and why we do the things we do. In psychological terms, trauma is often divided into big T trauma and small t trauma. Big T trauma includes intense, life-altering experiences like abuse, neglect, or even witnessing violence. Small t trauma, on the other hand, refers to more subtle stressors, such as parental criticism, lack of affection, or even feelings of exclusion. Both types of trauma can have significant impacts on how a person develops, but they don't necessarily affect everyone to the same degree, and not every challenging experience is a life sentence. But in our culture today, it's becoming increasingly common to blame our personal problems on trauma, sometimes without considering any other possible alternatives. It's become the default excuse to explain our behavior, and it feels a bit like a get-out-of-jail-free card. This mindset enables us to avoid putting in the real work to change, or can even give us a misleading impression that we're powerless to change because of our past. But the neuroscience behind trauma and its impact tells a different story. Research shows that traumatic experiences can affect parts of the brain like the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, which are responsible for emotions and decision-making. Dr. Bruce Perry, a leading researcher in trauma, explains that chronic stress from trauma can even rewire the brain in childhood. But here's the thing, the wiring isn't permanent, thanks to a nifty ability called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt and create new neural pathways. And this means people can grow and recover even into adulthood, often far beyond the effects of trauma. This is further illustrated by attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby in the 1950s. It suggests that early interactions with our caregivers shape how we relate to others later in life, often setting patterns known as attachment styles, like secure, anxious, or avoidant. But attachment styles aren't set in stone. The flexibility and adaptability of the brain allows you to develop new strengths, insights, and skills as you recover from difficult experiences, which results in healthier patterns moving forward. I talk more about attachment theory in my video on why toxic relationships are so addictive. You can check it out right here. Researchers have found that people exposed to similar traumatic experiences can have vastly different outcomes depending on factors like social support, personal coping skills, and even genetics. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, which refers to the positive changes some people experience after adversity. So while trauma can impact our lives, our development isn't permanently locked into the scripts set by childhood. In other words, it doesn't have to define your entire future. But understanding the origins of trauma and its impacts is still only the first step. And this in itself can be a very daunting and difficult task for many, so it's no surprise that it can feel like the work is done once you've reached this point. But in truth, the work has only just begun. Knowing the cause doesn't stop the effects. It might help you identify and understand certain patterns, but it doesn't magically change those patterns. This is where a lot of people get hung up. They talk about the problem and the trauma constantly and without proper support or a goal, which can do more harm than good. When you fixate on your trauma without actively working to move forward, it can lead to something psychologists call rumination. Rumination means dwelling on negative experiences over and over, which can reinforce feelings of helplessness and actually keep someone stuck in the past rather than freeing them from it. This is why some therapy approaches, like cognitive behavioral therapy, focus on finding practical ways to change thoughts and behaviors, rather than repeatedly revisiting the past pain. This brings us to the risks of over-focusing on trauma. Today, the intense focus on childhood trauma has created sort of a determinism, the idea that childhood dictates who we become, and that trauma alone explains our struggles. This perspective overlooks the importance of resilience and personal growth. A study from the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that although childhood trauma increases the risk of mental health issues, other factors like lifestyle, relationships, and coping skills also significantly shape our lives and development. Relying solely on trauma to explain challenges can even become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When people continuously label themselves by their trauma, they risk becoming trapped in a fixed victim identity that doesn't allow for healing and change. Understanding childhood trauma and how it can influence our lives is a very important step to recovery, but it isn't the only step, and it doesn't have to control the outcome. Focusing on the present, on what we can change and improve right now, can be far more empowering than dwelling on what happened in the past. Real growth and recovery come from what we do with that understanding. Building resilience and embracing tools for healing, like therapy or mindfulness, can help you shift from letting your trauma define you to actively shaping your future. If you've never tried therapy or counseling before, I've got a great resource for you in the description that will help you get started. Remember, you're not just the sum of your past experiences. You're also the choices you make each day to grow, heal, and redefine who you want to become.